So not too long after Deb and I moved to St. Louis, which was over 30 years ago, I entered into a state of mind that could best be called resentment. So I resented that none of my close friends lived anywhere near us here in St. Louis. I resented that my family lived in Seattle, over 2,000 miles away. After 25 years on a school schedule where I had the summers off, or at least the summers were a change of pace, I resented that I now had only 4 weeks of vacation. I resented that my little church was in constant conflict. And I was very quick to tell anyone how much better Seattle was than St. Louis. How the Pacific Northwest had mountains that met oceans and rivers that ran clear. Did you know those things exist? Rivers that run clear. And mild winters, and no humidity in the summer. And what did the Midwest have? You know, muddy rivers running through a flat landscape. So I thought I mostly did this complaining with a sense of humor, but I obviously insulted people who grew up here. So on one of our first Christmases here, Deb and I were opening some presents from one of her colleagues and his wife, and I opened the one with my name on it, and it was a box containing 4 Mary Engelbreit coasters. And they had a picture of a woman watering flowers in a window box, and the coaster said, "Bloom where you're planted." And I, of course, thought they got the labels mixed up. This is a lady gift. So I said to Deb, "These coasters must be for you." And across the living room, she held up something like, potpourri or scented candles that she had opened, and she said, "No, I think those were meant for you." So bloom where you are planted is good advice. Actually, more than that, it's really profound wisdom. But getting those coasters as a Christmas present really only added to my resentment. So the funny thing was this: I had an amazing life. We were both starting out our careers here. We were out of debt. So for the first time, we could just go out to eat, which we did a lot without feeling guilty about it. We lived in what was for us at the time a huge house that Deb's school rented to us for next to nothing. We had the greatest dog. We had new colleagues here in St. Louis that we really enjoyed. And yet deep down, I lived in resentment because it wasn't 100% what I thought my life would be like at that time. So bloom where you are planted was really good advice, but I just couldn't hear it. And I was often in a state of sort of discontentment and anger. So if your mind can spoil life when everything is going mostly well, just imagine what it can do when things go really wrong. When maybe you're fired from a job, or you lose a loved one, or you're diagnosed with some terrible disease, or you're just tired and lonely, depressed and fed up with life. Then it's very easy to think first and then feel that life is just suffering on top of suffering. So I've shared this with you before. When Buddhists talk about suffering, they often talk about avoiding the second arrow. So the first arrow is something that happens to cause suffering to arise within you. Again, maybe someone insults you, they steal something from you, they cheat you, someone you love becomes ill, something like that. That's the first arrow, and really we don't have any control over that. Just suffering comes upon us. But the second arrow is one that you shoot into your own wound. So when something like that arises, you say, "This should not be happening." Or you say, "Why does this always happen to me?" Or "What did I do to deserve this?" Or is God punishing me in some way? And when this is your response, when these are your thoughts, you only add to your suffering. So judgment, judging life, is like a second arrow that we inflict upon ourselves. And here's the thing, if you judge what happens as not right or not good enough, or this is not supposed to be happening now, you really end up in an argument with life itself. And you will never win an argument with life. So with that in mind, let's take a look at Mary's response in this scripture to some really troubling news. So first I have to say this. The church's shorthand for Mary and the Annunciation throughout history has been something like this. Mary hears that she's going to give birth to the Son of God. She's overwhelmed by her great fortune, and she rejoices singing this wonderful song. That, friends, is a fiction. That is a fiction. And it completely ignores the real experience of women in the ancient world. So here's what it was like to be a woman, well, for most women in the ancient world. Baby girls were more likely to be exposed than boys. If there was a shortage of food in a family, girls were given less to eat than their brothers. Girls were expected to be married between 12 and 14 years old. They were treated as property handed from their father to their husband. In the case of adultery, a father had the right to put his daughter to death. The success of a marriage was defined by the bearing of children, and childbirth was the leading cause of death for women in that time. So women were not free in the way men were free. They were always living under the authority of a father or husband or some other man. So with that in mind, let's look at the Annunciation. Imagine the real dangers to Mary in what this angel says. So, you're going to have a child out of wedlock with the real possibility of being rejected by your betrothed Joseph. And actually in Matthew's gospel, that's what Joseph plans to do. He just plans to put her aside quietly, is what it says. You risk the rejection or worse of your father, of death in childbirth, of a life now of bearing one child after another after another. So in any time or place, even now, in the best of circumstances, the news of a first child means that your life is going to be turned upside down. It's going to completely change. So for Mary, at 12 years old, her life as a child was over. And then there's this in the angel's news. There was a real danger in the news that this son would sit on David's throne. So Rome was ruling the land at that time, and they put down any rebellion with brutal force. So no one was reclaiming David's throne in Jerusalem without a fight. So imagine the announcement that your whole life, in a moment, as you know it, is over. Imagine your life as you dared to hope it would play out was gone in an instant. That is the Annunciation story. So it's not unlike a terrible loss, the loss of a job, the loss of your home, a diagnosis of cancer or some terrible disease, the loss of a spouse, the death of a child. But here's what I love about Mary after she hears this news. Okay, she's first a bit perplexed. We all would be. She says to the angel, you lost me at conceived. And then she asks the angel a couple of clarifying questions. Well, wouldn't we all in a situation like this? But then she responds to this news, this weighty, dangerous, world-piling on kind of news, just like a Zen master. She says, "Here am I, the servant of the Lord, let it be with me according to your word. Here I am, let it be. So this is wisdom that leads us away from judging what happens as wrong or bad or not coming at the right time. Instead, this wisdom says, this is what is. Realizing that no amount of arguing with life or complaining about the injustice of it all or crying out, this should not be happening, is going to change that this is what is. So, Mary shows us how to accept what is in faith. But Mary's response here isn't a kind of passive response. It's like, okay, the world is just happening to me, I'm going to give up. No, how could it be passive? She is saying, yes, I'm going to have this baby. Yes, I'm going to raise this child. There's nothing passive about that. So she makes herself fully available to what is with her, here I am, here I am. So Mary's is a wisdom that allows us to give ourselves fully, without fear, to whatever comes our way. So Mary says, here I am to life. She jumps right in. It's the deepest sort of wisdom, and it really is what authentic faith in the form of trust is all about. Trusting that everything that happens, is a way for God's light to break into the world, if we respond the right way. So again, this is not a passive state of being. So for instance, if you were to get a rock in your shoe, it's not just continuing to walk and saying to yourself, well, I suppose that this is what's supposed to happen. I'm supposed to have a rock in my shoe, and it hurts, but that's how it's supposed to be. I'm supposed to suffer. No. It's acknowledging that something has happened that is unpleasant, and it's saying, I can participate in this somehow. So yes, this is happening. I have this rock in my shoe. That's sort of let it be. But then you can take action. You can stop and get rid of the rock. That's the sort of here I am. I have an active role to play in what happens. So Mary's faith is not a passive faith. Mary's faith really boils down to something like this. Given that this is what is, and I can't change it, how do I bring the light of Christ? How do I bear the light of Christ more fully into this situation? So, no time spent arguing with what is happening, just taking what is and making it better. And so here, I think, is how Mary can come to our aid, can be a model for us when troubling things happen. If you find yourself saying to the news of the day, this is the last straw, I just can't take it anymore, I can't take this world anymore, just catch yourself, try and catch yourself, stop and remember Mary. So ask yourself, can I allow the present moment, what is happening, to be? This is what Mary was able to do. Ask yourself, can I allow what is happening in my life to unfold without making life itself into my enemy? This is what Mary is able to do. Ask yourself, can I trust that the wisdom, the energy, the light of God flows in and through all things and in and through me in any circumstance? This is what Mary was able to do, and this is the wisdom she offers us. So we can take on the challenges of this world and still remain in a state of peace and joy and love. That is what Mary did. So with Mary as our mother, no matter what the news, we too can bear Christ into the world every moment of every day. So when you find yourself in times of trouble, stop, breathe in and say, "Here I am." And breathe out and say, "Let it be." We too can give birth to Christ.